Good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for the introduction. It's pretty much 100% accurate. It's what I do, and I have no regrets. So I've learned a bit along the way, and that's what I'm putting up for service for the next 12 weeks. So, step one. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. So there's quite clearly two major parts in step one. There's the powerlessness and there's the unmanageability. So I'm going to start with powerlessness. I'll try and weave in some stories here and there. I've got a few. So we admitted we were powerless over our addiction. So what would that look like? I think it's quite a brave move to admit you're powerless. So in my own story, I became a drug-using alcoholic person, and I went to one meeting at a very famous treatment centre, and I never drank again. 30 years ago. But my drug of choice, sometimes referred to as my mistress, heroin, class A, was really what I was powerless over. So I may have not drank for 5 years, but then I picked up using the class A's again. And then I felt powerless, because no matter what I did, I just could not stop using. Just set up a pattern of events where I would end up picking up again, and then I'd get 2 or 3 days clean, and then I'd go out and pick up again. The last time I did this, I smashed up a car just up the road and left the class A's in the car. So to make a successful run at steps, you need a good step one. As I suggested, there's 2 parts. You've got to find this powerlessness. And one of the tools that we learned along the way is mind mapping, because it just helps to get to parts, understandings, and particularly patterns. Because the pickup just doesn't just happen. The pickup has probably happened in your mind before. Well, it's obviously happened in your mind before you pick up, and it's worth tracking down what happened. Was you upset? Did it get good? Was a really miserable day, or some episode that has accelerated the pickup? And it's also worth looking at what happens when you pick up. And there's many complicated ways of talking about powerlessness, but when I first come across a newcomer or someone who wants to work the steps, I only really have to ask 2 questions. The first question is, do you know what's going to happen when you pick up alcohol, food, whatever your addiction is? And the second is, do you tell lies to yourself? Well, if you're picking up and you really, in your heart of hearts, know you're an addict, you've just told yourself a lie. There's very complicated methods, some good. That's the only 2 questions I need to ascertain when I start to work with somebody. So what we're really after there's every step has a feeling to it. And the kind of feeling, step one, is misery, really, and powerlessness. And, unmanageability, that yucky, horrible feeling. So that's what, when you start to write out the first part, you want to feel it, Intellectually, that's okay. That takes you somewhere, but it don't take you too far, Intellectually, I know what would happen if I picked up. Is that going to keep me clean? What do you reckon? I wouldn't suggest it is. So you want to look at that. I mean, people have spent thousands of pounds being at treatment centres all over the world to get this part. You want to look at it. You really want to feel it. What's making you? What's driving you to pick up, to start using whatever your drug of choice is? And you really want to get it down there in the gut. And if it makes you unhappy, miserable, even tearful, but about 7 years in, I got someone sponsor me for a different way of doing the steps. It's an Indian man. And he had me crying in this part of the first step. 6 years, 7 years in. And it was simply this. He said, do you want to drink again? And I could just feel it. From the bottom of my heart, I would have done anything not to drink again. It's kind of interesting. And that's what the challenge here is, Do you want to use again? So you get in the feel of step one. This is what you want to feel. You want to feel the hopelessness, really. Write it down if you can. Share it, but feel it. It's a feel thing. Yeah? It's a sense that I really don't want to do that anymore. But unless you get that down in your gut, you probably have got a bit more to do, So I think we've nailed that. So we'll go over to the second part of step one, which is our lives have become unmanageable. So how we're going to approach that, on page 52 of the big book, there's a set of questions. Second paragraph, just center. I'm just going to read them out, and then I'm going to go through them one by one, because I want people who work this method to really, really get a good, honest start here.
We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to others.
So these are there's 9 areas of unmanageability that we suggest you look at and have been used for long time. So a first area is personal relationships. Now, how I would suggest you work with your personal relationships is you look at your relationships as a whole. So are you running around lying to everybody? Are you running around angry? Are you not able to communicate in a civilized manner? You don't have to be civilized. How's that working out? Are you angry with your boss all day? You're cross with the kids? And then, just to get a feel and an idea, then I suggest you pick between 7 and 9 personal relationships. Now, that will probably include partners, children, mums and dads, boss, best mates, etc., etc. If you go into all these relationships and you make an honest, remember the principle of this step is honesty. And make an honest appraisal of how it's going. You may see patterns that are through all your relationships. You may just have patterns with, I don't know, mum or dad who was useful. Yeah. You may have some interesting takes on how your boss is, or how he might be impinging the way you want to live your life. Now, again, you can use, if mind maps work for you, it's really a good way of digging out the information. Yeah. If they don't, I personally don't use them, but I suggest that others can. I use the old-fashioned method where I just write a few paragraphs about each relationship. Sometimes it pours out. It can even feel like, sometimes it can feel like a step 4. We've been accused of this in the past. Just go through the relationships. Be honest. Where's it at? Not where you want it to be. Not where it is romantically. Where it is in the moment. Having done that, we move on to the next part, which is emotional nature. How are we managing our emotional nature? Are we able to be truly honest and emotionally connected? A lot of us got a lot damaged along the way. We don't emotionally connect. Just look at where your emotions are. Are you angry? Are you walking around angry? Are you unable to communicate correctly? Are you not, even with the good emotions, are you able to communicate? Are you able to tell people where you're at with it? So dig in there. You know, I've met people who've been a long time around and they haven't quite been able to handle their emotional natures. So again, we're after honesty. How are we handling that? Okay, and I think once you do that, you should be well on your way. Again, sometimes small paragraphs, sometimes 10 lines. Sometimes it pours out here, you know, as with all these efforts. So having done that, where are we prey to misery? Now, I don't know how other people's last days are using. I think my last days using was some of the most miserable times of my life. It was just miserable. So we look at where we're miserable, where we prey to misery. You know, is this addiction? Is this substance or this behaviours making miserable? And then the next one is depression. A short story here. It wasn't until I finished my first run through the steps that I realised that I'd had a mild depression all my life. It was in the middle of a step, you know, finishing off your step 9. I realised. Now, I guess those around me would have seen me more jolly than that. Maybe yes, maybe no. I may never know that, but I knew deep down I had this mild unhappiness, depression. Sometimes these can be combined because it can be slightly tricky to separate, you know, misery, depression, unhappiness, but certainly misery and depression. Okay, so when you've done that, we move over to where are we having trouble making a living? Well, along the way, I got to sponsor a very wealthy chap, and he, you know, his first reply to this was, "I have no trouble making a living. I'm a millionaire, whatever." I said, "No, when asking you how much money you got." And when we dug in there, he used to go to work. He didn't know what his role was. He couldn't look his employees in the eye. His life, work life, was in chaos. He was making a fortune. I guess that's a society thing these days. I don't know. I'm not going to even comment on it. But when we dug in there, yeah, he was in bits. He was scared to go into the office door. So where are we having trouble making a living? Again, you know, if you keep the principle with step one, honesty, and go through all this, you're going to see some interesting things. Feeling of uselessness. So we have this is quite a common one. I find that people have a feeling of uselessness. I feel useless. What? Not a good place to be. I don't feel very useful in this world. Okay. Now, my favourite one. Where are we full of fear? And that says full of fear. It doesn't say where we're feeling a little bit of fear. It says where are we full of fear. My own story is until I found the program, my whole life had been dictated by different forms of fear, completely and utterly. I even had a visual experience where I just seen the word fear and I realised that my life had been completely and utterly driven by forms of fear. So there's a little nice way of talking about it, fear is false evidence appearing real. Again, honesty, go into this. I suppose if you're not feeling some form of fear, you've got to be feeling some delusion in there. So I encourage you to work quite hard on this one. It's sometimes hard to find because we have to cover it up to do the daily stuff. Now really go in there. And again, we can put it in a mind map and do the little sprigs off and see where it takes us. By the time I arrived, I wasn't in fear, I was petrified of picking up. But what forms of fear are in there? Okay, that's my favourite one. Unhappy. Where are we unhappy? I always think it's interesting. I've got 26 years next month, and I've done 13 sets of steps, a couple of different ones, mostly this method. And the day before, I'm hopping around the garden thinking, life is sweet, yeah? Everything's good. I've got the car I want, the girlfriend I want. My football team's going great. I feel great. The next day, I go into step one. I'm in bits. So what happens then? Well, we go into delusion and we find patterns of covering up our unhappiness. our misery, our depression, our feelings of uselessness. The final one. Where are we having, excuse me, difficulties being of help to others? It may not be everybody's thing to be of help to others, but it's certainly where some of the joys come from. You know, where are we having difficulties being of help to our kids, our parents, whatever. Again, stay honest, have the courage to go in there. Mind mapping, also usefulness, also very useful. Now, by now, you should be feeling like rubbish. If that's the case, you're probably having a really good step one. You want to feel like, you know what? I'm going to refrain from using the word because I'm getting better at that. You should be feeling like rubbish. Now, I'm going to finish now. Everything you pick up and you've learned about yourself, it's only facts. The steps work in such a way that, like, step one's the problem, step two's the solution. I would suggest highly you get out of this step as quickly as you can, because you don't want to be wandering around feeling like rubbish. Step two is the solution, where you set up visions. But we're not talking about step two, we're talking about step one. So I'm going to shut up now and put it out to anybody who wants to ask questions. I prefer you kept it at step one, but I'm also happy to answer any questions on the steps. The method I use is where my field of expertise is, but I've been around and I've studied other stuff as well. So, you know, I use the principles from the 12 and 12, etc., etc. So open, feel free. This is, you know, it's a relatively good opportunity. Take it. Thanks for listening.
Hello, Helen, Addict Seeking Recovery. Thanks very much, James. I have a question. It's kind of, I've been thinking about step 3 a lot recently, actually, so it's kind of related to step 3, actually, but it's just around surrender. And I guess I still get confused in the moment in my day-to-day life around when to surrender and how that feels and how I know when I should be sort of trying and when I should stop trying. But I just, yeah, I guess it kind of, it relates to step 1, obviously, like they all relate to each other, but, you know, the notions of being kind of powerless and you know, my life was unmanageable because I was powerless and I was surrendering all the time, but just to the wrong things. You know, surrendering to my addiction really and my cravings, and my sort of desire to escape. And yeah, I guess now I'm trying to sort of, yeah, I don't know. I guess surrendering to me now is kind of like letting go of like the outcome of things. But yeah, of course, you know, you have to put effort into things in life too. And I just struggle with knowing kind of when to maybe assert my power actually in things and when not to. I don't know if you have anything to say around that.
Well, yeah, surrender's a lifetime process, really. I mean, I think you have to surrender every step, really, you know. And it also takes a bit of practice. Like we talked about step one, there's a big surrender there. It's also the same when you go to step two. I mean, step three is a particularly large surrender. And the more you the more you get used to it. I was sponsoring someone a couple of years ago, and nearly all our discussions were go and surrender. Just go and surrender. So what it means is like, really, I mean, it must happen 10 times. I said, you just got to surrender, give in, throw the towel in, and don't hang on to the corner. You know what I mean? Throw the towel in and don't hang on to the corner. And I think, you know, any addict that's worth his salt or her salt ain't used to doing that, because we seem to run on self-will. So if you can turn self-will around to perseverance and make it a more gentle ride for yourself, and it's practice. And the other thing is, if you hang around and watch others who do the same, I was going to say further along, but that's not right. But people who, you know, when I first come around, I was no expert in, you know, throwing the towel in, I can tell you. I know you'd never believe that. But it's a practice. And as you were saying, it kind of connects with step three. Well, so how do we throw the towel in? Well, we need to have some idea of what our higher power is. I mean, I was brought up in that strange, very strange Catholic system. Well, I wasn't throwing the towel into that, I can assure you. You know, that wasn't good. That was not an option, you know. But being around others and, you know, using the good orderly direction, saying, and people who seem to have more successful lives with me throwing the towel in, you know, they say a meeting can be your higher power. I kind of understand that. I needed something more powerful. And of course, you know, that wonderful word perseverance and practice. Because if you're in a difficult situation during the day, if you step back and take a few moments out, because now we're not using drugs and everything, you know, to cover up our intuitiveness and knowings. If you got a difficult one, take a few moments out, nip behind the bike shed, if it's still there. I should imagine they're coming back into fashion now, aren't they? Take a few minutes out and see what your gut says. Now, you won't get it right every time. That's about the truest word I've said today. But you start getting used to it. I pretty much make 90% of my decisions from intuitiveness and from my gut. I can assure you I wasn't doing that when I rolled up. We just work at it. And with the guidance of others, you know. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
I was just thinking, if we don't get any more questions, I'll tell a recovery joke. How's that? I can't believe, Jesse, you're missing this opportunity. So there's this woman. She dies, and she goes up down to hell, and her husband's best mate. She's a coder. Her husband's best mate dies, and he goes to hell too. So he walks into hell, and he sees his best mate's wife sitting in the corner. And he gets rather gleeful. She'd been on at them, telling them how they lived their lives for 40 years. And he looks over and he says, "Sylvia, what are you doing here?" She says, "I'm not here and it's not hot." Meaning she's popped into denial.
Helen, addict seeking recovery. I have another question. I guess it's like, yeah, I was just thinking, what would you say was the opposite of step one?
Oh.
Like, what does that look like, I guess, in terms of how you're operating in life?
Well, in terms of the steps, that's, when I coach people through, I will give you my personal thing. But, so you wrote down all the misery, the depression, you're feeling the powerlessness, and that. Nice to see the only two real motivators. There's been loads of books wrote about motivation of fear and vision. So you'll have picked up a fair bit of fear as a motivation tool, if you like. And the vision one comes in step two. Because the greatest learning takes place when a person changes their point of view. And that's actually what happens between the first step and the second step. So how does that, that's a good question. How does that roll out in my own life? Well, it's probably best to speak where I am these days. I mean, I'm past the point of caring, really. I mean, you asked the question, I'm like, really how it rolls out, I don't really mind how my life rolls out. I suppose we talked about this the other day. The chemical addict has a kind of edge on some of the other behavioural things, because I just know, without a shadow of a doubt, if I don't pick up, all's going to be well. My life experience tell me it's going to be more than well. So I kind of live a lot of surrender. I have ambitions, but none of them that means too much to me. I live in a hell of a lot of joy and peace. Happiness is not a word I really understand that well. I don't know what happy is. But I know, I'll take a risk here. I'm hardly got any fear at all about anything. Now, did I have that? I suppose a lot changed for me about 5 or 6 years when I kind of was able to breathe a bit better, because I then had a history of knowing that on a daily basis I could get through without picking up, and then of course more patterns come up. I live a very joyful, contented life. Well, as I've suggested before, most decisions are intuitive. That's taken a few years, but I had a period there from about maybe 5 years to 15 years. Well, it was just absolutely plain sailing. Just get up in the morning, do a little bit, and carry on. The last 2 or 3 years have been very, very difficult. I had the tools. There's a saying, you never get more than you can handle. And that's, again, that's been my experience. And, you know, if you spend half an hour a day on your program, including a little chat with someone who's helping out or whatever, that will really make a good start. I mean, how many hours did we devote to our using on healthy behaviours? Don't answer that. I know. And if you just make a little space twice a day and really check in, you won't go far wrong. So I made a decision a while back to just always be absolutely as honest as I possibly could. That includes the good stuff, because we can share the misery, right? You know, we can share that. Oh my God, we can share that. But the good stuff, it seems society almost has a pattern of not wanting to put that out there. You know, my life, possibly bar one area, is pretty much perfect. It's certainly how my higher power would wish it for me, because I have a belief that higher powers, which could be the true nature of self, has, you know, it's got a right good deal sorted out there for us, all ready to plug into. But our stuff, fear, you know, just a lot of the stuff I've been talking about, is just in the way. You know, life's great. I am, as I said before, I had to tell my son that I wasn't going to tolerate him in my life anymore until he made some different decisions. And yeah, I was, which is rare for me, I was a little bit moved around for about 18 hours. And then I was like, okay, job done, move on, what's next? Now, it's unlikely you're going to get that in the first year. But as much as we take it a day at a time, this is really a program for life. And yes, I mean, you guys know my circumstances. I have a lovely wife. I've got a lovely apartment in the town I want to live in. I've got every material need I need. You know, and better than that, most of the crap I don't need. Well, that's taken a few years. But truthfully, it's beyond me wildest dreams. So how do I maintain that and cope with that? I don't take much notice of. I don't watch telly. I don't take much notice of people's nonsense. I kind of stay under the radar a whole heap. And, you know, I kind of, strangely enough, I don't think I was much a step Nazi as I'm made out to be. So I just use the tools. I live with someone in recovery. I can highly recommend that. And before I take up the rest of the meeting, I'm going to shut up. But it's all available out there for you. And I just frigging love recovery. My life was a mess beyond anything. So it's funny because none of you guys saw me walk in. Yeah. But yeah, my life was a mess. I had all the stuff, and I might have a few problems, but certainly not a mess. And I'm very contented here. If it all finished tomorrow, all would be well, providing Chelsea win the day. And I laugh and joke about that, but I highly recommend you have a little hobby or a big one outside of all this stuff. Because if you take all this too seriously, you'll end up around the action. So I've used football just as a little way out and my DIY skills to give me a break from, recovery. But as often with me, I don't know where that all came from, but I hope it's useful. I'll probably sleep tonight, whether it's useful or not.
Yeah, thanks, James. I was just going to come in and ask about that, really, what you just touched on, because I feel like I had a time where I was in a much better place from working the 12 steps, and I kind of really got the life that I wanted to lead, and I was on my own and I wasn't dependent on anyone else, and I kind of did some really amazing things. But due to then some health issues that I'm now really struggling with, my whole life is just like consumed by, looking after myself, food and, good food. And I feel like I've stripped a lot away, but I still I've struggled with the whole thing of just being like, oh, I've just got to do so much work here. And there's not the balance of where's the good and the fun and the interest. I mean, obviously with COVID, it's made it worse as well, but that kind of thing of having the balance. And it's like when you were talking about step one, and I was like, oh yeah, I can understand all that. The fear, the anxiety. I have a lot of anxiety at the moment. And it's like, I sit with that anxiety, but my friends are saying, take some antidepressants, and it's like, and I'm almost going to that place where I just think, okay, maybe I should just give myself a break, because it's like, what can I do? How can I manage this? I try to hand it over, and yet still I'm in this sort of, struggle of health. And I've just been in hospital this week, and I did really well compared to maybe, before. I wasn't catastrophizing it in the same way that I might have done in the past, because that's really scary to, I went in the ambulance and all of that, and I was just like, okay, it's all right, it's all going to be all right. And then I was in hospital yesterday, but I'm just like, tired. At the moment, I haven't got a sponsor. I've just stepped away from having a sponsor as well, because she couldn't sponsor me for, not to do with anything between us, but something else. And I was almost relieved. I was like, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to do the work, It's like, oh, it's just one less thing to kind of do. And it's like, so I don't know. It's like, how do you've obviously done the steps so many times. It's like, how do you, like you were just saying, balance those two things where you have joy outside of just kind of delving into this stuff that can go on, and it feels like it can go on and on for me, especially due to the health stuff.
Incidentally, the one area that isn't perfect for me, but it's all perfect. We can have that discussion. Is the health thing, you know, and I can only. It may sound a little harsh, but I can only share my experience. Is that, like, I've trouble with my eyes. I can't see that. And it has been suggested by medical practitioners that I can use drugs to make things better. Where I started you know, it's really interesting because I really felt that, you know. I'll just finish the sentence. One of my favourite readings in the whole of that big book was the acceptance chapter. It was by Dr. Alcoholic Addict. They've changed it. They now call it the acceptance. Is when I accepted it was where it was at, very imperfectly, it made it easier. Now, my biggest triumph in recovery, ever, above all the rest, was I was lying in a hospital bed and they were treating me with morphine, which you guys don't need to know this, but that's my absolute drug of choice. That's my mistress. And I was in so much pain that I'd taken it for a couple of days. And the nurse came round in the morning and she said, "I got your morphine in." I said, I don't want it this morning. You know? I told them, I'd made them very aware that I was an addict and my drug of choice was the opiate. She said, it was by mouth. She said, but everyone has their shot in the morning. You know what I mean? Everybody's sitting up in bed waiting for the morphine hit. And, you know, I don't really get that emotional about stuff, yeah. But when she went on to the next bed, I burst into tears. Because it would have been easy to just gobble up that morphine. I just felt that my recovery won over. This was a lot of years. I mean, we're talking 16 years in here, you know. I just knew in my heart it was such a triumph for me over my addiction. Now, I'm well aware it comes tomorrow, but you know, I've been around long enough, I know how that works. But when she wheeled that little trolley to the next dude's bed, what he done was I just felt I won a big victory. And so with the health thing, my victory was I just accept it as it is, you know. I might go blind. Well, you know, and I might not. But I don't understand your struggle. You know, if you can let your recovery win the small battles, you'll be fine. You know, I could give you advice on. I prefer to stick it to personal experience. That's the best personal experience I've got, you know, because the greatest triumph I'll have, I've visualised this probably 10,000 times, that I'm going into the ground in the box and I'll have a couple of Herbert mates standing there go, you know what, that Dick did it. He stayed clean.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I do get when I have acceptance, then things are easier. Sure. Yeah. That level of acceptance of where I'm at this moment in time, which is, yeah, and keeping it in the day or in the hour or whatever. Yeah. Totally get that. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for sharing your strength and hope.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time now. Thank you so much, James, and thank you everyone for your honesty and questions. We're going to stop the recording now. Just a note